Contemporary psychology is interested in an enormous range of topics, looking at human behavior and mental process from the neural level to the cultural level. Psychologists study human issues that begin before birth and continue until death. By understanding the history of psychology, you can gain a better understanding of how these topics are studied and what we have learned thus far. From its earliest beginnings, psychology has been faced with a number of questions. The initial question of how to define psychology helped establish it as a science, separate from physiology and philosophy. Additional questions that psychologists have faced throughout history include: is psychology really a science? Should psychologists use research to influence public policy, education, and other aspects of human behavior? Should psychology focus on observable behaviors or on internal mental processes? What research methods should be used to study psychology? Which topics and issues should psychology be concerned with? Background, philosophy, and physiology. While psychology did not emerge as a separate discipline until the late 1800s, its earliest history can be traced back to the time of the early Greeks. During the 17th century, the French philosopher René Descartes introduced the idea of dualism, which asserted that the mind and body were two entities that interact to form the human experience. Many other issues still debated by psychologists today, such as the relative contributions of nature versus nurture, are rooted in these early philosophical traditions. So what makes psychology different from philosophy? While early philosophers relied on methods such as observation and logic, today's psychologists utilize scientific methodologies to study and draw conclusions about human thought and behavior. Physiology also contributed to psychology's eventual emergence as a scientific discipline. Early physiological research on the brain and behavior had a dramatic impact on psychology, ultimately contributing to applying scientific methodologies to the study of human thought and behavior. Psychology emerges as a separate discipline. During the mid-1800s, a German physiologist named Wilhelm Wundt was using scientific research methods to investigate reaction times. His book, published in 1873, Principles of Physiological Psychology, outlined many of the major connections between the science of physiology and the study of human thought and behavior. 2. He later opened the world's first psychology lab in 1879 at the University of Leipzig. This event is generally considered the official start of psychology as a separate and distinct scientific discipline. How did Wundt view psychology? He perceived the subject as the study of human consciousness and sought to apply experimental methods to studying internal mental processes. While his use of a process known as introspection is seen as unreliable and unscientific today, his early work in psychology helped set the stage for future experimental methods. An estimated 17,000 students attended Wundt's psychology lectures, and hundreds more pursued degrees in psychology and studied in his psychology lab. While his influence dwindled as the field matured, his impact on psychology is unquestionable. Structuralism, psychology's first school of thought. Edward B. Titchener, one of Wundt's most famous students, would go on to found psychology's first major school of thought. 3. According to the structuralists, human consciousness could be broken down into smaller parts. Using a process known as introspection, trained subjects would attempt to break down their responses and reactions to the most basic sensation and perceptions. While structuralism is notable for its emphasis on scientific research, its methods were unreliable, limiting, and subjective. When Titchener died in 1927, structuralism essentially died with him. The functionalism of William James psychology flourished in America during the mid to late 1800s. William James emerged as one of the major American psychologists during this period, and publishing his classic textbook, The Principles of Psychology, established him as the father of American psychology. His book soon became the standard text in psychology, and his ideas eventually served as the basis for a new school of thought known as functionalism. The focus of functionalism was about how behavior actually works to help people live in their environment. Functionalists utilized methods such as direct observation to study the human mind and behavior. Both of these early schools of thought emphasized human consciousness, but their conceptions of it were significantly different. While the structuralists sought to break down mental processes into their smallest parts, the functionalists believed that consciousness existed as a more continuous and changing process. While functionalism quickly faded a separate school of thought, it would go on to influence Latin.